Hey, it's Kenkel Fritz from the Morning Show, and I guarantee you're going to love this podcast, even if you don't like football, because we've got Kirk Herbstreit with us. He is the host of College Game Day Saturdays. We thought we'd do this in light of the fact that, the Super Bowl is happening this Sunday. So whenever you're listening to this podcast, that's when this is going down or watching it. So Kirk wrote a book called Out of the Pocket. It's about football, fatherhood, and College Game Day Saturdays. Now, not only is Kirk one of the hosts on College Game Day, whenever ESPN has their big, huge college football game, he is the one that's doing the color commentary. And so he's all over the network, but found out that he's a follower of Christ, and then he wrote this book, and so we thought we had to talk to him. One of the people that he talks about, or we talked to him about, is someone named Lee Corso. If you haven't watched, again, College Game Day, he's a former coach, and he's one of the hosts of that show. They have this fun thing that they do at the end of the show before all the games start, is they predict who's going to win. And one of the things that Lee Corso does is he'll get, like, let's say it's Alabama versus Georgia. He'll pick up let's say he's predicting Georgia. He'll pick up the bulldog head and put it on him. They'll basically find the mascot head, and he'll put it on. And does this goofy, cute wave. It's pretty awesome. So we hope you enjoy today's podcast with Kirk Herbstreit. My name is Mike Kenkel Fritz, but my name is so weird that I just go by Kenkel Fritz on the air. It's like a mental speed bump. You hear that? You can't think of anything else. Some people call me Kank. We've got Misty and Sally, and we're all a part of the morning show. And awesome. We're a nationwide Christian music network. That's what we are. Great.
Well, we have poured through your book. I have just so enjoyed your story that this is a joy to have you on. And then what little I know about football, I was watching the Rose Bowl. And I was like, hey, I know that guy. And my husband's like, Sally, come on. So that was really fun. And then to learn what Ohio meant to you, which I didn't know at the time. And just to see that gigantic win, what a game that one was.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
It is. I mean, for certain people around the country, if you're not even into sports, the Rose Bowl is almost, it's like the Indy 500 or, if you grow up in Ohio, it's a Super Bowl, and it's traditional. Times are changing though. I have 4 sons, and the world is changing, as we all know, in so many different ways, and tradition sometimes is not maybe as important or appreciated. I think that's in a lot of different walks of life, not just sports. But in my house, we bow down to tradition, and I really think it's a big part of life. Whether it's history in our country, there's a lot of bad history, and there's a lot of good history. And I'm one that chooses to learn from both the good and the bad, and move forward, not live in the past, but I think you need to learn from the past and definitely try to move forward and teach your kids and try to be a light for people in life.
Amen. Hey, Kirk, I just have to say this, that I owe my introduction to you because of my wife. See, I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and I was kind of a Husky fan, but my wife is from Oklahoma.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what's going on here. And she actually went to OU. She was a huge Sooner fan, and she's like, Pac-12. And I'm like, what? And, she was talking about, this is a real football team, and then introduced me to College Game Day. And
That's funny.
Now I love it. I love football. I love the tradition. I love the bands. I find college football way more interesting than NFL, hands down.
Yeah, I think that's what's great for me. Again, traveling all over the country, and I like the NFL, but college football is just a different vibe. There's alums that come back to the games. A lot of times it's grandparents, parents. They have a son or a daughter that goes to the school. There's pride. There's the marching bands. There's certain spots on campus that everybody wants to visit. When they go there, whether it's a building or a grassy kind of knoll area that they used to do, homework with a bunch of friends or whatever it might be. It's just a very, because in Nashville, I'll go to a Titans game and I'm just like, holy cow, it's like watching a different sport. It's just the vibe is so different. And I think it's cool to hear your wife pulled you in.
Totally.
And with College Game Day, the show that I work on, Lee Corso, who is kind of an entertaining, to me, he's one of the greatest entertainers in television history.
Absolutely.
But he's always preached to me since 1996, because they hired me to be an analyst. So I thought I was going to study football and talk football. And that's why I thought they hired me. And I sat next to Lee Corso, and we didn't really have a talent department back in that era. They do now, but not back then. So I learned my job watching him just do his thing. And I knew I would never mimic him because he's very different. But I really learned that, and he always says, sweetheart, calls me sweetheart. He goes, we are in the entertainment business, and football is our vehicle. And so and to this day, I've been with him 26 years. To this day, he always reminds our group, whenever we're debating a subject or what we should maybe talk about, it's like Don Corleone sitting in the corner. He'll just, after 20 or 30 minutes of people arguing, he'll just kind of raise his finger and everyone's like, shh, shh, shh. He's like, don't forget, we're in the entertainment business. Football is our vehicle. And it just kind of brings everybody, it's like, why are we debating all this minutia? We got to stay true to who we are. So if you watch our show, of course, you're going to hear about football, but you're going to cry because there's going to be a story, a feature that makes you cry. You're going to laugh. And that's what makes our show, I think, probably what you guys try to do. It's not just certain topics over and over and over. You're kind of getting into different areas. And I think that's what makes a show entertaining, really.
You brought up Lee Corso, so let's just go ahead and go there. There's a chapter written about Lee, and you said one of the biggest compliments that you have is how you treat him. And it's obvious, Kirk, that there's a different relationship there. And if people don't know, Lee had a stroke, several years ago. But you can kind of tell as you guys are on the set that he kind of looks to you and you're kind of helping him in a way. Describe that and where that comes from.
Well, I mean, in the book, I talk about my journey to where I've gotten to this point in my career, because I'm a little bit of an outlier in my world, because more often than not, if you tune into a football game, whether it's a studio show or a game, the people that you're listening to, they won Heisman trophies, they won national championships, they won a Super Bowl, they're an MVP, like them from their accolades on the field. That wasn't me. I was kind of like the guy that just, I played at Ohio State, I was a captain and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't win an MVP of a Super Bowl or a Rose Bowl or any of that. I would have loved to, but I didn't. And so I had to kind of grind my way to local radio and local TV for a couple of years, and then caught a break, and I got to ESPN, and then I got into an audition a year later, and I was on game day at 26 years old. And that's very young, to be in that spot. And Lee Corso from day one treated me, even in the audition, like I was his equal. Like I was just like, you belong here. You're going to do well. And he almost like a coach initially, and I was his quarterback. Is kind of how he treated me. And then all of a sudden we worked together for 3 years and 4 years and 5 years. And I kind of watched him and talked with him like he was my coach. And I listened and I watched and I listened and I watched, and it took 7 years and 8 and 9 and just you can't hurry that process. And I always looked at him as my mentor, like a coach. And then he had a stroke back in like 2000 and I want to say 10. And he had I don't know if you have relatives or friends or anybody that's been through a stroke, but he had a pretty massive stroke, to the point where the right side of his body was really neutralized. He couldn't write. The right side of his mouth, he had a hard time speaking. And this happened like in March. So he had April, May, June, July, August, about 5 or 6 months to try to get together and try to go back on TV. Here he is in his 70s, and he's determined to get back on TV. And so we were all cheering for him. And, you know, he's a glass half full guy. Like he's always, you'd call him and talk to him and he's like, oh, everything's great, you know, and it's like, it's not. And so when we got back together, we were all wondering, is he going to be there? And he did. And from that point on, if you ever see our show, he gets stuck on words. And a lot of people think it's just because he's older. And it's really because he had that stroke. And so my job, I just feel like, because I'm sitting right next to him, is if he stumbles, you know, I don't want to just jump in and like save him, because then that's embarrassing to him. So I just try to subtly, like, you know, kind of elbow him or throw in a little word. I just try to do it very, you know, as innocently as possible, to try to just be there, like a safety net, without
kind of like give him a cue, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. Or interrupt.
Kind of like what we do for each other here.
Yeah.
Let me help you out there.
I mean, when you're working without a safety net on live TV or radio, it is what it is, you know. And so think now, he's 86 years old today and still on TV. And you know, to your point, I probably over the last 7 or 8 years, I'm doing all these games, national championships, and all this stuff that I think is kind of cool. And everywhere I go, when people see me, that's what they want to say is, oh my God, I just really want to tell you how much I appreciate how you handle Coach Corso, you know, and it's just, and so, yeah, that's probably the thing I hear most from fans when I bump into them.
Well, I think that speaks volumes. I mean, you look and you can tell it's not an act, that you genuinely love the man.
Yeah. I mean, I lost my dad 5 years ago. And because I've spent so much time with him, and not just on air, but, you know, we'll be in LA doing a photo shoot. I'm talking every year, you know, we're doing a Home Depot photo shoot or commercial somewhere. Inevitably, we're in the back of a car, he and I driving somewhere, 45 minutes in a car. And I went from being single to being engaged to being married to having identical twins prematurely by 12 weeks. They were in the NICU for 8 weeks. Didn't look like they would make it. And very often I was talking to him about all these different steps of life. And when you talk about, just like in your guys' lives, when you talk, maybe you can count on one hand how many people you really talk to about things. He was one of those guys, you know. He's a great listener. I would go to him with like all this drama and stress and almost in tears, and he would give me 2 sentences and it would just kind of make things make sense. And so, yeah, he became a confidant, just a guy that I've always embraced and just appreciated. So yeah, on air, you're probably just seeing, if you ever watch our show, you're just seeing, it is definitely authentic and real, and just appreciation for who he is in my life.
I wonder, you know, in your book, you talk about how your parents' marriage broke apart, and a lot of, you know, the time that you were growing up, your dad didn't have the kind of involvement that you wish he did. And do you think, you know, that maybe is you called him a coach, but I was kind of listening to you talk about him, and I thought that sounds almost, you know, like you kind of like I don't want to say replacement father, because there's never a replacement, just that father figure, that gentle leader in your life, that person that loved you and really wrapped his arms around you and you know, kind of ushered you into this amazing career that it's become.
Yeah, Misty, that's a great observation and great thought. I mean, I released this book back in August, and I've done a bunch of different things where people can come up, and thing I hear probably the most where people are in tears is about my parents and divorce, and how I was 8 years old when I went through that. And you know, my brother and my sister, especially my older brother, he had a lot of resentment to this day that he's coping with, and anger. And he and my dad got sideways pretty much the rest of their lives. And I didn't have that. You know, I'm not saying I'm better or worse. I was the youngest. I was probably sheltered from some of that. So I had an emptiness. Like I wanted more of my dad. And my dad was my hero when we were together. And then after, at 8 years old, he moved out and eventually got remarried. And I would go over there and I would be at my stepmom's house, almost like asking, can I go into the kitchen and get something to drink? It just felt weird. And my dad was like Richie Cunningham. Like he was like the nicest guy. I'm trying to, for the older generation, I'm trying to paint a picture. Like he was not this tyrant or me. He was Richie Cunningham. He was just a nice guy that didn't deal with confrontation well. And my mom, and consequently me and my siblings, we were confrontation, because every time he tried to approach my mom, it was, and he just, his way of dealing with that was just avoid. And so by avoiding her, he avoided me and my brother and my sister. And so that just kind of kept going and going and going and going. And even as we moved out of the house and got married, and he was just one of those guys that kind of procrastinated. And so what happened is Lee Corso came into my life, and he listened to me, which is very important, because having 4 boys, and this is not a tell-all book at all. It's more me admitting all my mistakes and failures and trying to learn. But one thing I learned from my dad is he didn't listen ever. He nodded his head but he didn't really hear me. And so that for a kid, the amount of, I can't even describe to you the pain that can give a kid. You know, when you're 12, 13, 14, 15, you got, oh my gosh, dad, this. And he's like, oh yeah. And you can just tell he's not there. So for me now, I'm the opposite. Like I could be in the middle of doing this with you guys. One of my kids said, hey dad, I'm like, oh, hold on a second. You know, I'm the opposite. I'm the opposite end of the spectrum. You know, I am like, that's one thing I'm going to do, is because of the pain I felt, is gonna listen.
Now I'm feeling a little guilty.
We're paid to talk.
Well, no. Let me back up here. Well, I just mean, I don't know if I'm that focused. On on my son. We have a daughter with special needs. She had a similar entry into the world that your twins did, and she was in the hospital for a long time, and but I have a typical 12-year-old son who will talk your ear off. And it is a practice that you have to really get into of, okay, I'm going to listen to you now,
Totally.
So valuable too. I was raised by a father who didn't specialize in listening. And so I really related to that, and how now I've married somebody who will just give me all of his attention. And I think it's interesting that we do find ways to fill that void, but it's a good lesson for all of us of the importance of paying attention and listening.
I think, again, I'm not like perfect at it, but I do have an awareness to it. And I'm like an analytical person in general. So I'll watch people at a dinner table have a conversation. And not that if we ever went to dinner, I'm sitting there
analyzing us.
Analyze. But I just find it interesting to watch how many people, when they're talking to one another, they say something, and the other person, like in a tennis match, responds. And while that person is responding, the person that already spoke is already thinking of a counter to what they said, not what the person is saying. And so you'll watch people just sit there, and the other person's doing the same thing. And it's like they're sitting there having a conversation, but they're almost talking to themselves, because they're not really listening to the convo. So I don't know, that I just feel like that I think because of the pain that I got at an early age, it's like a form of abuse really for me, because it'll never leave me ever. And unfortunately, when I'm with my wife or friends and I'm very introverted, I don't speak a lot. And so when I rarely do, when they say, tell us something about, and I'm like, it's no big deal. That's my way of being like, I'm good. But when I occasionally do open up and then I get interrupted, it's incredible. This is something I need to work on. I just will go just like complete shutdown. Now there's no chance I'm talking about anything. So that again, it goes all the way back to being 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and how my dad did that.
Is there since you've, gone through divorce as a kid, something you walk away from that you could help those of us that have been divorced how do you, is there like best practices? You're like, if you could have done this, this whole thing would have been a better situation. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't prevent it all the time, of course. Now I am divorced and remarried, but I guess it's a blessing that we didn't have any kids. But is there anything that you look back on and say, this would help the whole thing work better?
I don't know if you get to a point where it's inevitable and there's divorce. The one thing, I've had friends that have gotten divorced and their parents did not. So the one thing I tried to say to them was, listen, this is not the end of, we have this vision of divorce. And when you break away, a buddy of mine's went through a really difficult divorce. And I said, the most important thing is to not let whatever, if this is when there's kids involved, you can't let your issue become an issue where you use the kids as pawns. I think sometimes the kids get used as pawns in a divorce, and there's guilt associated, and they take out their anger and frustration with you, and they use the kids in a way, and that's long-term damage. So I would tell you, if you can't avoid the divorce, somehow, some way, you have to try to deal with one another, but don't let it impact the kids, because now you're talking about handing all of your issues down to them when they turn 25 or 35 or whatever. Then they're going to be dealing with whatever stuff you're dealing with later in life. So the best thing you can do, in my opinion, is try as hard as you can to have an amicable relationship, try to work through your differences one-on-one, and don't ever use the kids in a way. I have a buddy of mine right now going through a divorce, and it's so sad to see. And I said, listen, man, you're going to lose some battles because the tact that she's using. But in my opinion, if you can look at the big picture, be positive, be encouraging, be loving, all these negative things that she's saying about you and this stuff that it's going to eventually wear out, because the person she's creating you to be, they're not experiencing that, because you're there being yourself and you're being loving. Don't get caught up in then when they come to you, you say this about their mom. Like, remember, that's their mom.
Right.
So you have to treat their mom with respect. And so I think sometimes divorce gets ugly because I think the people getting divorced can't separate that. They have it's so toxic that they'll use, the kids get around it, and then that's when it's just complete turmoil.
Misty, this hits home for you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. No, I was just sitting here thinking, I don't even think that people oftentimes understand the lifelong repercussions. My husband was married before me. He has 2 children, and that's exactly what happened. And here they are, adults with kids of their own, and there's no existing relationship because of that. Mm-hmm. And it breaks his heart. But, listening to what you were saying, and I wish that they were able to experience this side of him, because, I feel like I'll say stuff that I shouldn't because I get really upset about the situation. And he will always say, she's their mom, and I appreciate that she's taken care of them and that she loves them. She's the mother of my kids. And so even in the aftermath of something as detrimental where there's no relationship, it's complete estrangement. I wish that they were able to experience that side of him and see, how loving he still is about, even though things didn't end well. And yeah. So it just broke my heart listening, because I feel for your friends.
Yeah. Divorce is powerful. It really is. And I think we've all witnessed things that you're mentioning, where I feel like once they got sideways, whatever the story is, the initial divorce, I think there's often one party just can't get over whatever it was, whether it's, whatever it is. And I just hate to see the kids somehow get swooped into it. And that's the only encouragement I would ever offer in divorce is never lose sight of the kids, never lose sight of what damage you can do to their lives long term, even though it might feel good because you got this energy and anger and you're letting him have it. And then you don't realize it's not what you're doing to him. It's what you're doing to that 13-year-old, that 10-year-old, that 8-year-old that's sitting there now involved and is going to have damage done to them when they get older.
Yeah.
You know, I am so grateful that you poured your heart into this book. I admit that I began reading through here thinking, how am I going to relate to somebody who's so about football? But page after page after page, you had so much wisdom to share. And so, two things. I really relate to your whole story of being in grade school and high school and refusing to be involved in any public speaking. And now look at you. Same thing for me. I mean, I basically apologized for existing until Family Life Radio. I was just like, where can I hide in a corner? And no, I will not speak in public. And now I've made an entire career of it. So I was really fascinated to see how God had taken you through that journey to where you're at today. And I think people would be surprised to learn that a lot of us in media really are introverts at heart. And yet we have a message to share. So first off, thank you for this book. And thank you for everything I picked up from it. There's pages turned and things highlighted and pictures of your family in here. I'm so grateful you included that. Why did you write this book? What was your aim?
Well, everything you just described, I'd be the last person that you think would write a book because of being, I was just born an introvert. And so Gene Wojciechowski, who I'm very good friends with, who approached me right around April of 2020. Late March is when we all learned about what was happening in our new world, and we were all adjusting. This is way back when people, we didn't leave the house. Remember that time when in March of 2020, we were just like, what's happening? And people are, how do we get groceries? And they're being delivered, and people are wiping them down. So it was right around that time when he called me and said, I've got some other projects, but I really want to take one more shot at this. Will you consider writing a book? And he and I have spoken with in the past, and I've always kind of been like, yeah, maybe, when I'm 70, but not right now. And then this time he called me, and I was just like, I don't know. Remember that time? I mean, it was just, remember how strange things were? I just thought it was a good time to reflect. He and I've always had a vision of not being a football book. I didn't want to write a football book only.
Well done.
I didn't want to write just about broadcasting. I wanted to, the way I'm speaking to you right now is how I speak on TV. I don't play a character. I don't have a shtick. My shtick is just being myself. And so I thought if I was,
by the way, amen. Thank you.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, I think people want genuineness and realness. So
I appreciate it.
That's what was in the book. Yeah.
And I just thought, if I'm going to do it, then as uncomfortable as this is going to be, then I need to, talk about my whole journey, and going back to, being 7, 8 years old. And like I described in the book, I lived in a neighborhood like a lot of people in the 70s. I mean, it was a perfect world of swing sets and freeze tag, and we were on big wheels, and I mean, it was just nonstop outside playing. That was all we did. And all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, my mom says, your dad and I are getting a divorce, and I moved out of that neighborhood. And so my whole world just changed. And so I thought, there might be a lot of people that, if nothing else, these stories can resonate, that people can relate to what I went through, and being painfully shy, being the new kid. About every other year, I was in a new school.
Wow.
I was really quiet. My face would get really red if they called on me, and I just would get embarrassed. I had nothing to be embarrassed for, but it was just, if they said, Kirk, I would just be like, oh my God, it would just make me so uncomfortable. And so I just thought the journey was interesting. And then how I got into football, I wouldn't have gone to college if I didn't get a scholarship. I would have probably joined the Army, or I don't know what I would have done. So football, that's why I have a passion for it. It really changed my life. And, so I guess the reason was, it was the timing of when he asked me, and it was a good time to reflect and open up my heart and be vulnerable and talk about stuff that I haven't really thought about in 30 or 40 years. So it was, and it was just the hope of people being out there that have been through some similar stories that could be like, oh my God, I've watched this guy for years. I would have never known that, and I think I said in the book, I have a perception that I was born on third base, like this, like I hear it from fans, the kind of the mean spirited people about, blonde hair, blue eyes, has that Mr. Everything. And I'm like, man, you guys don't know me at all.
Right.
Right.
And so that was another part of it, just kind of showing the real me as opposed to maybe the perception of who I am on just on TV.
Talk about your faith. You've talked about how you've gone to Bible studies and things like that. I've seen you post scriptures on Twitter. And how does that play in your life? How does that play out?
Oh, I didn't grow up, going back to my childhood, I didn't grow up in a perfect neighborhood or a church where everybody went on Sunday and we look forward to going to church. It was very different for me. I mean, moving around as much as I did, when I went to church, it was kind of being pulled by my ear, and I didn't want to go to more Sunday school. It was like another place I had to go and kind of be quiet. And so I avoided it. When I went through divorce, some people turned to drugs. I turned to sports. Like sports became my outlet. And when I say outlet, I'm talking 24/7. I was either playing sports, not football, sports. I was either playing sports, I was listening to sports on the radio, I was watching sports on TV, probably subconsciously digesting stuff that would eventually become my future life. But I was consumed. Like, people would be in a room with me when I was 8 or 9 years old, and they'd say, "Hey, Kirk," and I would there's pictures of me just watching that world. And so that became almost my God, is that world. And then I, just through different relationships, I found an emptiness, inside me. Like, as much as I would enjoy sports and do well and feel like, wow, this is my place, I always felt like an emptiness, like there was just a hole inside me. And as I got older, into high school, met more and more people that had faith, I just became curious. And my grandfather, who was down in Texas, he gave me a Bible. And my family, I don't want to paint them as if they weren't religious or didn't have, the Holy Spirit in them. It wasn't the perfect situation. And so for me, it became a guy named Chris Spielman. He was a football player, and his wife had a big story, but she died of breast cancer. But he is a devout Christian, and he really did a nice job with me, bringing me over to a Bible study with a bunch of grown men. I was probably in my mid-20s at that point, and these guys were all probably in their 40s and 50s and very successful businessmen. And here they were, about 15 of them around a table every Monday night, and they would be breaking down scripture, and wow. I would just come and I would listen. And they would read the scripture, and then they would kind of go around the room, and everybody would kind of open up and talk about what they got out of it. And I was like really intrigued because I was learning and really impressed with the people that were in this room. So I was excited to go to the next Monday. And so, the next Monday I would go, and I was very cool. They were cool with me being quiet, and I was just watch. And so I just
soaking it up.
Yeah. I was just digesting it and intrigued by it and asking questions and, and getting really profound answers. And that just kind of became what I found was, when I was in that walk, everything in my life just seemed to be calmer. Everything in my life I seemed to be more fulfilled. I'm talking inside. I felt more complete. And then I think, going back to my life and kind of scrapping along, you have sin in your life, and you have failures in your life, and talking to these guys about that's what Jesus is about. It's like, no one at this table is perfect. Like, we all have sin, we all have mistakes that we've made. That's the beauty of what Jesus is in our lives, and the Holy Spirit is in our lives. And I was like, wow, really? Like he's like, God loves me too. Like, I'm okay. Like, absolutely. Yeah. And I was like, wow, it was a very powerful thing. And, I don't know. I wish I would be more consistent, because I have a Bible study group now. And I feel like when I'm on that, man, it's just, and then I get into my season, and it's like, you get pulled here, you get pulled there. It's like, you just got to get back in line. But yeah, so my relationship with God is great. But if there's anything, being very candid with you, I need to be more consistent with that walk.
Oh, I think we all do.
I was going to say, don't we all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on a Christian radio station, and I think ultimate hypocrite. But really, I mean, it's. I think it's a struggle. It is a. Well, let's just put it this way: the enemy doesn't want you to do that.
Right.
So there's this kind of, and then life in the world, just
This
busyness,
tug.
just kind of tugs you away. But you're right. I think there's proper balance, and there's peace. It's like what you described, that feeling of, wow, life is different now. You know?
Yeah.
The
I think
power of an invitation is what I really heard in that.
Oh, good point.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
someone
Somebody
invited you.
invited you. Mhm.
Yeah.
Go,
Yeah.
Misty.
I was just going to say, I think this also really illustrates the importance of, number one, like gathering together and being open about our struggles and being real and diving into the word with other people. And then also that spiritual mentorship, that discipleship, just how crucial that is. Because I think about, what if they hadn't taken the time, not just to invite, but to walk alongside you as you were growing. I think sometimes it's easy to sort of gloss over that person who may not be where you are in the room. But just taking the time and answering questions. I love that. And I think that's a big responsibility we have. Sometimes we don't realize maybe we're even in the position to offer it. But just, if you have that person in your life, that speaks volumes to me, how important it is to make that connection and to walk alongside them and to help them grow when you have the chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. The power of that group, because I've met one-on-one with folks too, even earlier in my life. And it had an impact on me, but there was just something sitting around a room of very successful businessmen and how they were just basically all humble, all just like, we are just here to be together and love each other and support each other and learn more every day about God together as this group, because we love each other as brothers. And I was just so intrigued by that. And that's what kept bringing me back. And eventually I got to a point where I would actually have a thought or two, but and they were, if I never did that, they would have been okay with it. And that's what I think I really appreciated about it, was there was no pressure. Like, Kirk, you want to say the prayer here at the end? I would have been like, oh my God.
No, thank you.
Hey, yeah, Misty.
I was about to say, you were speaking right to my heart with that statement.
Misty's like, don't call on me.
Yes.
Don't call on me.
I was
Like,
being
somebody
honest.
asks me to pray in public, and you can like see part of my soul shrivel up and wither away in that moment.
Seriously.
Sometimes we do that just for entertainment.
That's
Kirk, you want
hilarious.
to close in prayer?
Oh, that's
man.
funny.
Hey,
Very
you're
funny.
a self-admitted introvert. I got to ask, is your wife the complete opposite?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how it works, right?
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah.
she one thing about her is we both have had to learn. For me, my last name, it's very long and very unusual and different. And then when you start to live in the public eye with it, it starts to become something, that people can recognize and relate. And then they start to see your face. For me, it's if they see my eyes, they're just like, and so it's very strange because college football fans are incredibly passionate.
Oh,
And that's why I love them. But when you're with your wife or your kids and you're kind of on a vacation or you're out at the dinner, you're just trying to lay low. And a lot of times I just have a hat. If I'm not on air the way I'm dressed right now, that's how I'm dressed pretty much always. And she's had to learn and still is learning how to go, just all of a sudden be a Herbstreit and just people looking at you and whispering and pointing. And when you walk into a room or into a restaurant and you don't know what they're saying, and I dealt with it because I was a football player and you just kind of get used to it. But that part of it has changed her a little bit. It's made her a little bit more reclusive, a little bit more not the way she would normally want to be. But she's still, especially when we're with our friends, she's very, very comfortable in being outgoing and kind of speaking for both of us, very often.
Are there tips and advice? My wife is an introvert, on how I can live better with my wife. How do we? Now, you did say interruption was one thing, and you're right. If I interrupt her and something, oh my gosh, But help us climb inside that personality a little bit.
Well, it's a hard thing to really relate to unless you had a sibling or a parent or somebody, a child that has it, because it's not by choice.
Right.
One of my sons is very similar to me, and there are a lot of times I'll see him, because I think you're only as happy as your least happy child. And one of my sons is just very flatline, and a lot of times I'll go up to him like, "Yo, are you okay, man? Is everything all right?" And he'll look at me like, "Yeah, everything's fine." And I just always have my antennas up watching. And he's probably in his own mind perfectly content in a great peaceful place of Zen. And yet he's giving off a vibe of just, he doesn't look that happy.
Right.
And so it's one thing for me to live it. It's another thing to witness it, with somebody else. I would just say, just kind of checking in, and not necessarily reading in too much into their body language or their facial expressions, and assume that they're in a dark space, or assume that they're in a bad mood, or whatever it might be, just because of the
Misty.
We'll
be on the might be. Look at Misty, and she's like stone faced, like she's.
But they might be totally just chilling, just thinking about something, and they don't realize, like maybe Misty and I, we don't realize we're giving off, like we're just not that. My wife's just happy. My wife's smiling, and I'm just not. I'm just not that way. I'm happy inside. Right. I'm not always happy on the outside. I don't know the best way.
Your face doesn't show it.
I don't know the best way to cope with it.
We love you, Misty.
Well, that's actually good insight.
Calls it resting grumpy face.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh man. Wow.
Well, I am so grateful again that you poured your heart into this book, and who knew that a football book would be so much more. And I can really appreciate what it means to open your heart to the world and share things that are not easy to share. And yet I found myself relating the whole way through. Grateful that you took the time to put this down, that your parents allowed you to. I know your father's gone now, but your mom's still living, right?
Yeah.
And so kudos to her as well. That's got to be hard for her.
I agree.
And then your wife and your 4 boys, full family there.
I got 2 more questions real quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
You go.
You said something really fascinating to me. You're only as happy as your least happy child. That's interesting.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my mom told me that one time, because my brother, he sometimes deals with some stuff, and I've always wondered, it's different when you're looking at a brother or a sister, then you have your own children, and then, you can't keep them in a cocoon their whole lives. And wow, what a time to raise kids. I have 4 that are 20, 21 and under. And, these right here, iPads, video games, all the social media, TikTok and Instagram and all these different things. Don't get me wrong, there's some really wonderful things about that. And there's also, when you're raising kids, some really tough things about that. And for my wife and I, we at first were like, we're just going to like not let them have phones, when they're in 5th grade and 6th grade and all their friends are getting phones. And then the more we got experience and wisdom, the more we realized, even if we were to homeschool them, which we didn't, at some point we have to, they're not going to live with us their whole lives. At some point we have to hope and trust that our parenting is going to be strong enough to allow them to make good decisions in the world that they're going to eventually live in. We can't live with them and protect them their whole lives. And so once we started to look at it through that lens, we realized we have to let them, we can't stunt their growth socially. So we have to allow them to learn this world, and we have to allow them to make mistakes. And I'm really fortunate that, you know, I have 4 kids that I think try to do the right thing. You know, I think they're not, you know, perfect at all, but they have good hearts. And I think they are humble and they treat people well, which is a win to me, just beginning right there.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, man, but if one of them gets into a dark spot, oh my gosh, it's like I have a 100-pound dumbbell on the back of my neck, and I can't sleep. I'm just staring at the ceiling. I'm just like, what can I do? Because I'm big on letting them. This is a big parent thing for me. I think our generation of parenting right now, we are the snowplow generation, not the helicopter generation. We're the snowplow. The snowplow generation is, I'm going to clear out all the problems and let them walk behind me. Bad teacher, get rid of that teacher, get a new teacher. Bad umpire, bad coach, get rid of them, but get them on a new team. You know, anything that's going to be bad, we're going to get rid of it. And then, we got to fill out college, application. Hey, give me that. I'll fill it out for you. Like, we need to get into a school, like whatever it is, I'll fix it. They're not having any time socially. I'll get them some friends. You know, we'll figure this out together. And I'm just like amazed that so many different people. And again, I'm not saying I have the answers. I'm just saying I'm cool with my kids failing. I'm okay with it. Hurts. It really hurts to watch them fail, but it's part of the process. Let them get knocked down, and then help them back up, dust them off. What did we learn? And then move forward. Because as you guys all know, in your own life experiences, life is every day there's adversity. Every day with work, every day with your marriage, every day in life is adversity. And if we do this snowplow where the kids have no problems, how are they going to become 23 or 24 and all of a sudden, okay, unless you just continue to be a snowplow for them, like they have to learn how to deal with junk. And it's okay to make a mistake and then get back up and let's keep going forward. And so I let my kids get into these dark spaces. Now I'm watching and I'm there for them, but I want to see them try to fight out of it. And it's hard when a lot of their peers don't have a lot of problems because they've been kind of cleared out for them. So that's right. It's been an interesting challenge. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see in our country how we move forward with social media. Kids don't pick up a phone and call each other and communicate. They just do this. They don't have to deal with problems. I mean, we're heading in an interesting direction. And I don't blame the kids at all. I think it's more of the adults as much as anything.
That is so good.
Yeah.
My wife and I deal with that right now. My son is going into PE class, but last year in PE class, there was this horrible, awful fight, and the kid ended up in the hospital. And there was, we shouldn't put him in PE. And I'm like, well, why don't we cross that bridge when we get to it?
Yeah, and I'm not saying these are easy issues at all. I'm just saying, they're, they need to be addressed. And it's just a different time. That's all. It's a different time, different generation for sure.
What is one more last question? What is God teaching you lately?
I would say in my business, the world moves really, really fast. And if you have some success, the initial response, whether it's through agents or just the energy around you, is to advance to the next thing. And what's the next hurdle? What's the next thing to climb? And what's the next challenge? And I think patience for me, I think just being patient and not being in a hurry. I'm 52 right now, and in my business, that's still relatively young. And I think sometimes when you have some success, it's very natural to want to continue to grow and want to continue to climb these different mountains that are out there. And for me, I just need to kind of just chill and just keep doing what I'm doing. because I have a passion for it. I'm real big on when you have a passion for something, that stay in that space, because you might think something else is better, but if you don't have that same passion, but it's maybe a bigger opportunity, but you don't have that love, then I don't know if it's going to be as good for me. So I would say just being patient right now is something he's working on with me.
That's good. I love that.
Very good. Yeah. It just takes me back to that decision you had to make between selling pharmaceuticals to you know, taking your first gig in broadcasting for what was it, $1,200?
$12,000 a year.
$12,000 for the year. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought I was rich. I thought I was rich.
Well, when you love what you do, you know,
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is, you know, that was your passion. So,
Yeah.
and it's panned out well for you. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, hey, wow, we have gone way beyond anything we expected to go with you. So thank you.
Yes, really appreciate
Appreciate
you.
it.
You got
Appreciate your
it.
time. Appreciate your
Thank you.
vulnerability and just your transparency. Thank you.
Just grateful that we had this opportunity,
Amen.
and grateful again for this that you poured your heart into.
Yes.
So much to pick up on. And after this, we'll take and wrap and tell people where they can get the book.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
do all
we
that.
do all that post. So
Do all that boring
yeah, you
stuff.
get yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, Kirk. Appreciate your time. You're a
Oh,
blessing.
Got it.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Appreciate
Okay.
you.
Thank you guys.
All right.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, God bless you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.